So glad you're here today for worship and for the beginning of a new sermon series. We have bookmarks out in the lobby if you want to keep up and use Discovery Bible Study to track with the text for this series. But I'm excited about this series because we're going to talk about something and take a biblical look at something that many of us wrestle with at various times in our lives, and sometimes for the biggest part of our lives, and that is purpose. Finding our purpose, looking for meaning, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of I am doing what I am here to do. Of course, there's all kinds of books written about finding your purpose, podcasts, all kinds of things, lots of information out there. Researchers and social scientists have come up with a term that is called purpose anxiety. Now, that's what I have when I step into a room and I forget why I'm in there. Has that ever happened to you? I walk in there and I'm like, I came in here for something. What is my purpose for being here? But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about the pressure or the tension that we feel when we try to wrestle with the thought of finding fulfillment and purpose. And a lot of times we do that with our job or our career or whatever it is we do every day, whether it's staying at home with the kids or it's going to school or whatever it is. We sort of try to align that with God's purpose for us. And we try to figure out how do those things meet up? And where do those things come together so that we can feel a sense of purpose? And all the books and everything else out there will tell you, well, you can discover your purpose because it's within you. So ask yourself, what are you passionate about? And there's nothing wrong with asking that question, and it probably is revealing in many ways. Others would say, what is it that you enjoy doing? Or if you can discover your why, then you can know what it is you're supposed to do. The latest trend is something I saw where they're encouraging people to think back to when you were a child. What did you really enjoy doing as a child? Because before there were social constraints, before limitations, before the circumstances that you find yourself in right now, you were a child with some sense of freedom, without those constraints, and there were things that you enjoyed doing. There was things that energized you, things that you chose to do. And so maybe that's a key to discover your purpose. And I saw that and thought, man, if you can make a living watching cartoons and eating moon pies, I'll sign up for that, right? Maybe there's a better way to discover our purpose. Maybe it's not so much looking within as it is looking up to God, letting God speak into our lives, a sense of purpose and direction, fulfillment and focus. We are, after all, citizens of heaven. I know many times we get mistaken and we think, well, I will be a citizen of heaven one day when I die or if Jesus comes back. But the truth is, we are citizens of God's kingdom right now, the kingdom of heaven. And so that means the values of the kingdom should give shape to our lives, including our purpose, our focus, our sense of identity. We allow the kingdom to shape what it is that we do, and more importantly, who we are. You see, your purpose is rooted in the call of God. In fact, maybe that's better language to use. What am I called to do? Who am I called to be? I know we don't necessarily use that sort of language. Sometimes, because I've been in ministry for a long time, someone will come up to me and say, well, when did you get the call? I'm like, I'm still waiting on the call. I don't remember a call. I didn't get a specific call. God sort of arranged the circumstances that's how it happened. That's where I am. So we don't necessarily use that language, but maybe we should because it's very biblical. And it's not just for preachers and missionaries. It's not just for prophets and people we see in the Bible, but every one of us has a sense of calling, being called by God. So to help us focus on purpose, we're going to be very purposeful in our focus on purpose. We're going to look at the life of one of the prophets in the Old Testament, Elisha. Much of his story is told in the book of 1 Kings. If you want to turn there, if you have a Bible, in 1 Kings chapter 19. We'll be in 18 and 19 today. But before we meet him, I want us to back up for a minute because we need to get the forward to his story. We need to set the scene for the arrival or the entrance of Elisha. And to do that, we're going to look at his predecessor as prophet, and that is Elijah, someone with a very similar name. It's easy to get confused. Elisha, Elijah. I wonder if the people ever got confused. Like, yeah, Elijah said, no, that wasn't him, that was me. I don't know, but sometimes we get confused. But two different people, very different people, both used by God with a sense of calling. So let's back up and talk about Elijah just for a minute. And let me just give you the quick version of the story that then introduces us to Elisha. We go to Mount Carmel. That's where Elijah had this dual epic, this incredibly epic duel with the prophets of Baal and this pagan god Baal. And they built two altars. Elijah said, let's see which god shows up. They put cows on the altars or bulls on the altars, and they called on their gods to bring fire to the altar. Now, if you know the story, you know that Yahweh God, Elijah's God, our God, showed up and showered down fire from heaven to incinerate the altar, everything around it. He made himself known. Meanwhile, Baal, the pagan god, was a no-show. He didn't show up. And unfortunately for the 450 prophets of this false god, Baal, they had to pay the price for his absence with their lives. They lost their lives that day. The king of the northern kingdom, Ahab, is not a good guy. He's allowed outside influence to come in and pull the people away from God. He is not happy with the news of what Elijah has done on Mount Carmel. He's not happy that the 450 prophets of Baal are gone. And so he does what most guys do when they're not happy. He complains to his wife. His wife is Jezebel, and she is not a good person either. In fact, she has influenced Ahab. She is an outsider, a pagan worshiper, someone who is drawing not only Ahab, but God's people away from God. And when she hears about what Elijah has done to the 450 prophets of her God, she is incredibly irate. And she sends a message to Elijah. And basically the message is, you're going to die in 24 hours. How would you like to get that message? You're going to die within 24 hours. Now think about Elijah. This is a man who faced a famine. This is a man who confronted an evil king. This is a man who provoked 450 pagan prophets who were holding sharp objects. This is a man who challenged this pagan god Baal. And now, with the threat of this woman Jezebel, he is terrified. She got him good. He took off. He was so scared. He went on a road trip, went to the wilderness. He needed to hear our last sermon series, didn't he? He ended up in the wilderness. And once he was there, he threw himself a pity party. He started crying out to God, I'm all alone. Woe is me. He was discouraged. He was depressed. He didn't know what to do. He felt like he was the only one who was still faithful to God. Of course, that wasn't true, but that's how he felt. And I think we see something in this part of the story that's going to be a common thread throughout this series, because it's a common thread in Elisha's story, and the truth is in our stories too, and that is that Elijah struggled to see what God wanted him to see. Because of his fear, he couldn't see that he was not all alone. Because of his fear, he could not see that God was with him. Because of his fear, he couldn't see that God still had a purpose for him. He was distracted and blinded by his fear. You see, the eyes of fear see what is visible, and sometimes even see it bigger than it really is. But the eyes of faith, they see what is unseen. Isn't that the nature of faith, genuine faith? That's what the writer of Hebrews says, Hebrews 11, verse 1. Faith is having the assurance of what we hope for, and the confidence, being certain of what we do not see with these eyes. That's why it's called faith, because you can't see, you can't have all the answers, you can't know the outcome. You are taking a step of faith. Elijah couldn't see God or what God was doing. He couldn't see that he was not alone. He couldn't see that God still had a purpose for him. So finally, in this melodramatic moment of despair, he cries out to God, I have had enough, God. Take my life. I'm ready to end it all right now. Notice he doesn't take his own life. He asks God to do the dirty work. Well, God does not answer that prayer, like that at least. Instead, God shows up. He shows up. And maybe you remember this story. He puts Elijah in the cleft of the rock on this mountain. Some believe that it is the very same spot where God had Moses on the mountain, Mount Sinai, when he confirmed his covenant to him. So Elijah is in the cleft of the rock. He's in the cave there. And if you know the story, you know that God sends these powerful displays of his might. He sends this wind, this mighty wind. He sends an earthquake and then fire. But the text says that he is not in those grand displays of power. And then he sends something else, a gentle whisper. The most unlikely places to see God, right? The thing that we wouldn't be looking for. The thing we wouldn't hear, we wouldn't see, we wouldn't expect. That's where God shows up. God is in the whisper, making himself known to Elijah. And when he shows up to Elijah, he asks him a question for the second time as he has him on the mountain. And the question is this, Elijah, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? What a question. What a big question. Isn't that the question? The question we often ask ourselves, why am I here? What is my purpose? God, why did you put me here? Why did you put me on earth during this time? Why did you put me in this place or in this family or in this situation? Why am I here? Now, I believe when God asked Elijah that, he was testing him. He was challenging him. Because Elijah wasn't where God had put him. Why are you running in fear? Why are you trying to escape my calling on your life? You think you are running from danger, but you're really running from my purpose for you. Elijah was not alone. And his purpose had not changed. So God redirects and recommissions Elijah. He says, go back the way you came. Turn around, go back. And when you go back, choose a couple of new kings, and also, really important, anoint your successor. Anoint Elisha as prophet. So that's what Elijah does. And that's where we'll pick up the story in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 19. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I'll come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. So Elisha was a farmer, and he was probably a relatively wealthy farmer. He had 12 yoke of oxen. Wealthy farmer. The farmers I know, they would say that's an oxymoron, wealthy farmer. But scholars believe that Elisha had some sense of means. He was doing okay. And one day he's out with his oxen, dragging the plow around, and suddenly Elijah comes up to him. This man comes up to him, throws his cloak around him, and then takes off. Now, we read that and we think, that is so strange. How odd is that? Can you imagine? You're at work, sitting at your desk, your boss comes in, sets his coffee mug on your desk, and then turns around and walks out. Like, what is that about? Or maybe you work in a medical office and the doctor walks in and takes off her white coat and puts it over your shoulders and then she leaves the room. Or you work construction and the boss comes in and he takes his hard hat off and he puts it on your head and then he leaves. Like, what is going on? But they knew what this was about. It's strange to us, but in that culture, It was an understood custom. This was the passing of the torch. This was the transferring of the mantle of responsibility. This was Elijah choosing, with God's help, his successor. And this moment is significant, not just because of the cloak symbolic of God's power, much like Moses' staff. Just in the reading earlier that Jimmy read, did you remember? When Elijah is encountering God on the mountain, he pulls the cloak over his face. This is the same cloak. But this is an important, significant moment because this is God empowering Elisha. In many ways, God's saying, Elisha, I have chosen you. I am empowering you. I am calling you. From farmer to prophet. And it's not that Elisha didn't have purpose before this moment. Please don't misunderstand. Because God's purpose is not so much about what we are supposed to do as it is about the person we are to become. We get so sidetracked by, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? I think the real question is, who is God making me to be? What type of person, what type of character, what type of faith? How is God working and shaping me from the inside out? The truth is, most of us probably won't receive a dramatic calling like this. Someone's not going to come up to you and throw their cloak around you and walk off, would be my guess, unless they're just asking you to hold it. More often, God's calling comes through the things he speaks through his word to us, right? Or his spirit, or opportunities he puts in front of us, or the giftedness that he's given us. And so think about purpose in these terms. Not so much, what is it I'm supposed to do, but who am I supposed to be? Who does God want me to be? Who is the person God is transforming me into? I think once we start shifting our thought that way, we begin to get closer to what purpose really means. In this short story, we see lots of movement. There's sort of a flow of the text, this natural progression in Elisha's response to God's calling. And I think this flow reveals something about obedience. It reveals something about answering God's call. It reveals so much about how we step into moments like this full of faith. So let's look at two or three things really quickly. First of all, answer the call. Answer the call. That's what Elisha did. I like this somewhat new feature on, at least it's on my phone. I suppose it's on yours too, but it screens phone calls. You know, you can set that up to screen potential spam calls or bot calls, which is so good. So if someone calls your number, if it's not a number in your contact list, then the phone automatically makes them identify themselves and why they're calling. That's great. And then you can look at that and decide, do I want to take this call or not? No, it's a spam call, right? Or it just kind of cuts them off because it identifies them as a spam call. I think many of us sometimes, if we're honest, we like to screen God's calls. We see God is calling and we're like, oh, this is a bad time, God. I'm kind of doing what I want to do right now. God, I have this dream, I have this vision, and I know you're going to ask me to do something else, or to sacrifice, or to be uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Elisha wasn't looking for a career change. He was just out plowing his field like he'd probably done, who knows, hundreds of times before. And all of a sudden, God calls him. And he has a choice to make. In that moment, what am I going to do? Keep plowing the field like I've done so many times in my past? Or am I going to throw everything down and chase after Elijah and answer the call of God? He had to decide in that moment. It's the same thing that Peter and the other fishermen had to decide when Jesus came along and said, follow me. It's the same thing Matthew, the tax collector, had to decide when Jesus saw him in his tax collector booth and said, come and follow me. In that moment, what are you going to do? Are you going to answer the call of God? You see, purpose begins with a decision, with making that choice. A decision to leave behind comfort for calling. A decision to stay with what is familiar or step out in faith. a decision to leverage safety and security, embrace uncertainty for the sake of being faithful to the call of God. Now, many of us, that makes us uncomfortable, right? We are risk averse so often. And we are also passive. And it's a lot easier just to sit back and say, well, I never knew what I was supposed to do. I never knew what I'm supposed to be. I never knew what God wanted from me. And maybe all the time God is just calling. Elisha doesn't have all the answers when he goes, does he? They didn't set up a meeting with HR to talk about all the details. There wasn't a job description. There wasn't an itinerary. It was just the call of God to go. To step out in faith. To say yes to the next step. Purpose begins with a decision to say yes. Are you saying yes to God? Second thing, answer the call. Number 2, burn the plow. From the moment he decided to say yes, Elisha was all in. Yes, he went back and said goodbye to everyone, but what else did he do when he went back? He didn't just quit farming. He destroyed everything that might appeal to him to come back to that old life. He didn't just store his plow in a shed, he burned it. He didn't give away his livestock, he didn't sell his livestock, he barbecued them. Everything in his life, practically, that gave him a sense of identity and security and purpose until that moment went up in smoke, literally. He hosted a big cookout. He said farewell to his family and his friends and his former life. The 16th century Spanish explorer Cortez had nothing on Elisha. I'm sure you've heard the legendary story. People don't even know if it's exactly true or not, but he is known for this phrase. When he docked the boats in the New World to discover this new world, legend has it that he turned around and told his men, burn the ships. Burn the ships. The idea is that there's no plan B. We're here to stay. There's no turning back. For Elisha, there was no turning back. No plan B, no safety net. He would place his life, his purpose, his identity into the hands of God and trust him. Again, that makes us uncomfortable. We like to keep our options open. We like to have a backup plan to our backup plan. We like to play it safe. In other words, we like to be in control, don't we? We want to manage things, sometimes manipulate things, so they work out the way we want them to work out. Even when we convince ourselves that we're taking a leap of faith, it's usually a calculated leap, a leap with a safety net firmly in place. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I feel like I need to say this. Hear me well. God may not be asking you to quit your job and to burn the place down on your way out. As tempting as that may be some days, He's not telling you to leave your spouse or neglect your family or set aside responsibilities or commitments that you've made. God's calling will never contradict with His word. God does not send mixed messages. But He does ask you to surrender whatever competes with His calling on your life. And you know what that is. Scripture tells us that it's not uncommon in the New Testament, in the first century, for people to come up to Jesus and express a desire to follow Him. They saw that He was different. They saw that He was special. We want to follow you. In Luke chapter 9, we have an example of 2 or 3 people that came up to Him and they say they want to follow Jesus, but they also have excuses. They have reasons why they can't do it just yet. And it's not that their reasons aren't valid. It's that Jesus sees into their hearts and He knows what's really there. And I want you to listen to His response and see if you hear echoes of Elisha's story. Luke chapter 9, verse 62, this is how Jesus replies or responds to these would-be disciples. He says, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God." Sound familiar? Elisha burned his plow. There was no putting his hand back on the plow. It was gone. And so I wonder, what is the plow that you keep hanging on to? What is the plow that you struggle to let go of? What plow do you need to burn, to set on fire? And maybe it's something unhealthy, maybe even sinful. Maybe it's a secret sin. Maybe it's resentment and anger. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's something you're pursuing that isn't godly. Maybe it's a relationship or a lifestyle that is ungodly. Or maybe it's something that isn't necessarily inherently sinful or unhealthy. Maybe it is a job. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's your sense of identity. Maybe it's a dream job that you have always worked toward. Maybe it's the approval of others, your social status, comfort. You know what it is. You know what the plow is that you keep putting your hands on, because it's who you are. It's what you do. It's what you've known. Maybe it's time to burn it. And number 3, embrace the role that God has for you. Elisha chased down Elijah and said yes to being his successor. And he burned down his previous life. Now, what was all of that for? Surely, if you're Elisha, you're thinking, okay, God has something big for me. Right? I'm going to start a revolution. I'm going to preach to the masses. I'm going to do all kinds of miracles so people are impressed with me. Look at the end of verse 21. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. What? Servant? That's not very glamorous. That's not in the spotlight. That's not special. That's not a mighty calling. That's a menial task. I thought I was going to be a prophet, not a personal assistant. After this dramatic calling, Elisha doesn't immediately become prophet Elisha. He becomes the sidekick servant. He pours water on Elijah's hands. He walks, he watches, he serves, he learns, and he waits. We get impatient. We get impatient and we think that God has something big and flashy for us. Right? If he's calling me out of this life, he's calling me into something with much more impact, much more prominence, maybe more in the spotlight. I'm reminded of what Peter and some of the other disciples told Jesus as they took inventory of everything they had left behind, wondering if it was worth it. Matthew 19, verse 27, Peter answered him, "We've left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" You see what he's asking? Jesus, look at all this we've left behind. We've burned down our old lives. What's in front of us? Is it going to be worth it? What's the return on our investment? Give me a big purpose with prominence, a big impact, followed by a big reward. And we want it sooner than later. Listen, your calling is so much more about faithfulness than it is about prominence. God calls you to be faithful. God may not call you to be prominent, to be famous, to be what the world would say would be impactful. God wanted to continue to nurture in Elisha the heart of a servant, the same heart that he was nurturing when he was plowing those fields, when he was still a person with purpose. Maybe God is trying to do the same thing in you, develop this heart of service. And maybe it is in preparation for something else. But maybe that's it. Maybe your calling, your purpose is quiet, consistent service. What a noble, God-honoring purpose. Maybe your purpose is daily faithfulness to him, to love him with everything you've got, to love your neighbor as yourself. So God called, Elisha surrendered, and then he served. If you're still waiting on the call from God, be faithful right now. because he is calling you. Open up the Word of God. Answer that call. Love your neighbor. Forgive others. Serve other people in need. Share your faith. Make disciples. Raise your children well. Honor God. Worship him. Be faithful. You may not understand the big picture. You may not realize a big purpose right now. Often God simply calls you to say yes to the next step. And with every step, he begins to reveal more and more of himself and his purpose for your life. And remember, it's not so much, what am I supposed to do? As it is, who is God making me to become? As you answer yes to your next step of faithfulness, if we can help you, please let us do that. In just a moment, a couple of our shepherds and their wives will be in the parlor. It's a room behind the stage area. You can exit the auditorium in just a minute and go there. They'll encourage you, pray for you. You can come down to the front. We'll do that as well as a church family. Maybe today, your next step, you're saying yes, is saying yes to putting Jesus on in baptism. Confessing your faith that Jesus is Lord. Being raised out of those waters of baptism, a new creation with a new sense of identity and a new purpose as a child of God. Don't wait any longer. If there's something we can do for you today, we invite you to come as we stand and sing. Let's stand.
I have decided